Hi, Shannon Rowe Jackson here from Caution Art Set Play, and today we are going to be drawing some trees in colored pencil. This has been a highly requested video, and so I thought that it would be good just to go through the basics of drawing trees. So I'm not going to be doing a whole piece today. I'm actually just looking out my window and drawing some trees and doing it that way, and then I'll be sharing my tips on how I do that. So to start off, I am using the Derwent Lightfast colored pencils, but any pencil that you have will work. These just happen to be my favorite at the time, and they have a lot of fun greens, so I thought they'd be fun to use, but Polychromos, Prismacolors, anything you have on hand will work. And then I also have a Perfection eraser, and I have, not sure if I'll end up using this or not, but a stylus pen. This helps with indenting to get certain details. And my handy dandy Bic mechanical pencil. I'm working on Stonehenge paper. Basically, I just taped it to the back of a old, what was it? Like just a pad of paper that I had. I always keep the backing for when I'm working like plein air or not up in the studio. I'm actually down in my living room right now. I apologize if you can hear the fan. It's really hot here. As I mentioned in my previous video, my air conditioner in the studio is broken, so I've been exiled to my house. I'll also be using a zero or a mono eraser by Tombow, mono zero eraser, however it's said. And then I have a water brush that I have with a little bit of OMS in it. I'll link everything in the description below. As usual, this is not a sponsored video. These are just materials I have on hand, and you can use whatever you have on hand as well. Just a side note, I normally don't tape my paper this way because this is not acid-free tape. So if I was doing a real piece, I would be using artist tape, but I forgot my artist tape up in the studio, and I was too lazy to go get it, so I just used the tape I had on hand. Alright, so to begin with, I am just going to do a light sketch. As I said, I am looking out the window, and this is something I was going to do at plein air. This sketch is probably going to be just a little bit darker. I'm starting with the top of the tree, but you can pretty much start with any part. Actually, I'm going to come down and do the stem. I have a small, quite young maple tree in my front yard, so I think that's what I'm going to work with. Basically, when you're drawing trees, you want to pay attention to the direction of the branches. A few things to remember: the trunk is always wider on the bottom and gets thinner as it goes to the top. And this whole trunk isn't showing, so I'm not too concerned about getting that perfect. If this was a tree that wasn't going to have any leaves on it, then I'd be a little bit more concerned about that. But since it has a bunch of leaves on it, I'm not all that concerned. And then the branches kind of move out from the trunk and then up, and they're usually curving. They're not normally straight, so you want to pay attention to that. You got to think they reach for the sky, like I don't know, whatever that character's name is. Buzz Lightyear, is that the one that? No, it's not Buzz that says that. I don't know. It's been a long time since I've seen Toy Story. So anyway, so basically, like, normally when I would do a preliminary sketch, it'd be a lot lighter than this, like I said, or I would come through and lighten it up with an eraser, which I may end up doing, but this is just so you can kind of see. And I'm really only drawing in the few branches that I can see. And then I'm going to come back up here to the top, and I'm just kind of looking for these clumps. And it's very abstract. You want to look for the abstract shapes in these clumps. You don't have to draw every individual leaf. But see, I'm already, just with these few scribble marks, I'm already getting the impression of leaves. And the leaves are always going to be in clumps. It's similar to when you're drawing hair. It's like the hair of a tree. So you're going to look for the clumps instead of the individual leaves. And that's because these are actually branches. If you picture it, even though I can't see the branch, there's a branch in here that's connecting all these leaves. And I should mention, I think I did mention that this is a maple tree. So this shape will be kind of, you know, specific to this kind of tree. But the idea is the same no matter what kind of tree. So I'm just looking for these clumps and I'm picking them out. And if I were going to do a regular piece with trees, like a bunch of trees, I would be doing this sketch on a much cheaper piece of paper. I'm working on Stonehenge now just because I'm going to be adding colored pencil to it, and Stonehenge works well with colored pencil. So I want to be able to get, you know, the effects that I'm looking for so I can show you. But if I was going to be using this as a preliminary drawing, it would be on cheaper paper. Then I would transfer this outline to the more expensive paper. I have some branches that are coming up. Looks like they're curving out. Sometimes it helps to draw that shape in there. As you go down the tree, a lot of times the lower branches are going to come out further because they have to reach up around the higher branches to try and get that sunlight. But I go back and forth. This isn't going to be perfect. It's not going to look exactly like the tree, but nobody's going to know the difference. You can't see my tree. I apologize. I think you might be able to hear my dog snoring in the background. This time it's the Chihuahua and not the Boxer. But as I mentioned in my previous video, I have some little studio assistants with me because I am not in the actual studio. So it'll get kind of thinner as it gets out, and then it gets a little bit more clustery as we go towards the base. In the front here, there's going to be some branches as well. So they're actually going to be coming off the front of the trunk. So you have to consider that. You don't want to just do, you know, a shape like this. You know, that's just a silhouette. You want to pay attention to the fact that there are branches here. And they come up, they're thinner on, you know, when it's going like that, normally you got to think of perspective. It's going to be coming up and widening out. So you think of that kind of as like a triangle or a diamond shape. Sometimes there's little holes in the tree where there's not a lot of branches. You can draw those in as well. That's going to give you that realism. And as you can tell, I'm just doing scribbles. There's nothing perfect about this. Just kind of scribbles and dots, implying those leaves and getting those clumps. And I'm looking at my reference, or I should say at the tree out in my front yard, more than I'm looking at my paper. It's almost like doing one of those blind contour drawings. And as I said, this one's a younger tree. So she's not as full as some of the other trees in my yard. But I just wanted this to be a quick lesson. And as I said, you may have different kinds of trees in your yard, or you may live in a desert and have cactus or cacti, or I don't know, honestly. I live in Maine. I'm surrounded by trees, so I couldn't imagine not being surrounded by trees. I don't have palm trees where I live, though, so yeah, I'm not going to be doing palm trees in this lesson, though I have drawn them and painted them before. That's something that somebody's interested in, but mostly the leafy trees, and I have pine trees here, too. But this can translate really easily into pine trees. I can show you a bit, maybe a smaller, not like a whole tree, for pine tree lesson if you want towards the end of this. So now I have like my main shapes in, and again, this isn't perfect. This is very quick. This is all like real time, so it's not necessarily perfect. I am going to lighten it up a little bit. I didn't bring my kneaded eraser down, so I'm just going to kind of bring this bad boy over and soften things out a bit. Normally I would use a kneaded eraser for that, but let's get adventurous here. See what we can do. I didn't bring my brush down either. I am just with it. Okay. It does have like this straggler over here that's like really wants the sunlight. It's kind of funny. But it's a clump of branches there. Anyway, so now what I'm going to do is I am going to look for the darker colors that are within the shadow areas. I might lay in my trunk first. My trunk is going to be in shadow. I'm putting my lighter color down first. And with the trunk, I am not going to be blending this out heavily because it is rough. Bark is rough. So I really have no real reason to blend that out completely because, let's put a little bit of grass in here just to, there is actually a nice heavy shadow under this, but I'm not going to get into that today because I want to be able to have time to focus on the tree. Yeah, bark is rough. So let some of the paper show through a little bit. If you know, like, especially if you're working on toned paper, I like to work on Canson Me tints a lot when I'm doing any type of like landscape because you can have that nice undertone to set the mood for the landscape. So there we go. It's got a little bit of a nice darkness there. As with anything else, you really want to look at your values. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to lay in the shadow shapes. And again, I'm just looking for these abstract shapes. I'm not pushing too hard. I'm doing light layers. Just looking for those shapes between the leaves, because that is going to give us our realism. So we're going to get those shadow shapes in there first. I'm going to alternate between some dark colors. I want the shadows to have life in them, so I'm not going to do black. I'm going to do dark green. I'm using racing green. And a little bit of forest. And this one is foliage. Well, that works out. And I'm looking through and just trying to find those abstract shadows. Just look for those shapes in there. A lot of times, realism is about the abstract shapes that build up to make an image. So I'm looking in between these branches, in between these clumps, kind of shaping out those clumps a little bit. There's a lot of shadow in this area. Just looking for direction of light. Right now it is the afternoon, so I have a lot of overhead light. So a lot of the shadows are going to be from below these branches until they get out there a little bit further and can get into the sunlight. And in the middle here. As I said, remember there's going to be some clumps of leaves in the middle. Sometimes there'll be a nice little break in it where there's no branches at all, and you might be able to see the impression of, and see there's a little bit of the bark in there, some branches there. So I'm going to go around those with the darkness because there's going to be leaves behind them too. And you can already kind of see this shape coming together. This is my favorite way to do trees, and it actually works well for grass too. And something else that I can show you, as I mentioned, I have this stylus here. I can go over a branch here, and then when I come in with some shadows, I go right over it, and that branch will stay right there. So if you want something to stay lighter, because sometimes the branch will have a little bit of a highlight on it, you can even come to the other side of it and go like this on it, so it has the shadow, and then it's a highlight and a shadow. Kind of put that shadow color here. Now I'm just kind of being silly because those, I'm kind of making up shadows there just to show an example, but. And then when you put shadows, you can even put shadows on your trunk, and those shadows will kind of be dappled. Similar, because, you know, the leaves are going to be kind of coming down on that. So I'm just going through here. I am a tree lover from way back. I really love me some trees. As I said, I've grown up in Maine, and so I've been surrounded by them my whole life. I feel alive when I'm near trees, possibly because they're giving me a lot of oxygen. Who knows? That could have something to do with it. Quite literally. Again, I'm just looking for those abstracts. But so I think that's part of the reason why I love to draw them, because it's something that I've been around my whole life. I just love trees. I used to climb trees as a kid, back before I was terrified of heights. Those were the good old days. And there's just something about them. I know there's that old, like, adage of, you know, people are tree huggers. I'm a tree hugger. I am a tree hugger from way back. Look at it, though. It looks like it's reaching out its arms and it wants to hug you. So, like, how can you not love trees? Anyways. Now that you know a little bit more about me and my strangeness. So, these are not going to be the only shadows. There are going to be shadows within the highlights as well. You want to use as many values as you can, even in the lighter areas. So I'm kind of coming through around these shadows, and I'm going to create some midtones when I get them laid in a little bit more. That way there it'll transition well to the highlights. Again, I'm just kind of paying attention here. I have a little dark spot here to those shapes that I see. And again, this isn't going to be perfect. And it won't necessarily be perfect the first time you do one like this. But this is a good way to start, because I do a lot of pieces that have trees in the background, and they tend to be really intricate. Like, there's a lot of detail that way. Even though they're in the background and I blur them out a lot, trees take time. And so I get a lot of questions about how I do those trees. And this is a good way to start. Start with one. Get used to doing this kind of technique. And then you can start tackling forests and things like that. Because really, it's just going to be this repeated. And you're just looking for these clumps. And you're looking for these shapes. And this translates well into paint as well. I paint very similarly. I will start with my shadow areas and then start looking, you know, for those shapes and paint those in first. Now I'm going to come through with my OMS and start kind of getting some of that out. And again, it's not perfect. This is a very quick project. It's just to give you an idea. Going around those positive shapes. Now I'm going to come in with my lighter color. I think this is, I don't know what I want to use. This one's a pretty one, but that's not as light as I would like. So I'm going to go right in with this, I guess. Still not as light as I would like, so I'm going to come in with some yellows, because this is a spring tree. So let's see. That's way bright. Just do a light kind of wash of this yellow over the highlighted branches. So I can kind of brighten up that green a little bit. All right. This is very strange looking right now. We are now entering the ugly phase. So we're going to go, I'm going to bring that color in. That's like such an artificial color. I'm not a huge fan of that color. The color, I mean, as long as you have your values right, you don't have to have the exact green. But I'm a fan of the more earthy greens and not so much like the blue greens or the fluorescent greens. I like olive greens, sap green, things like that, but everybody is different. So I can actually come in here if I want to, and pick some of these highlights back out a little bit. That green actually works well once it's mixed with this olivey kind of green. So this is where I'm going to kind of put some of these little shadows in the lighter part to give them definition. And where I already put some of that yellow down, it kind of helps because I have that base color. And these are translucent, so you can kind of get that olive on top of it, and the yellow and the olive will mix together. So, actually, I don't know what it's called. That's foliage. So I'm going to come back and kind of put these shadows on the underside of some of these lighter branches. And it acts as a good mid-tone. I'm really kind of in a time crunch with this, so normally I would be spending hours on something like this. I'm only spending like a half hour at most, maybe a little more. So it's not going to be beautiful. Well, it's going to be beautiful, but it's a tree. If it looks like a tree, then it'll be beautiful because trees are beautiful. But this isn't the most perfect tree that I've ever made, for sure. I'm going to add a couple more branches and fill this out a little bit. She's looking a little spiky. And don't be afraid to kind of outline just a little bit, just in areas. Like, I had that branch here that I wanted. It's going to stand out a little bit. Kind of like this. I have another little one down here and right here that are kind of coming from that other direction. Kind of create shadows around them. And trees, they have weird shapes in them. They're just a bunch of weird shapes. And there's layers of branches upon layers of branches. I'm going to come in and darken up some of these shadows again, because once I blended them out, they disappeared. But I'm only going to darken certain areas. They're not going to be all the same darkness, because some of these areas are further away than others. Some of them have more layers over them than others, like more branches. Alright, so I'm going to bring this color back in that I'm not a huge fan of, because I think the yellow helps with that. And I'm just going to do some light, I don't even have it completely sharpened, some light little scumbling marks over it, and I'm letting that yellow show through. This is where you want the texture of the paper to help you out. It's smoother on the bottom. I'm going to put a little more pressure in an area where I want shadow. But then I'm letting that yellow show through. This is one of the benefits to using colored pencil. And letting the pencil strokes be rough on something that is natural like this is really beneficial. Like, I'm going to come through and kind of draw out some of these branches again, because they have some shadows under them. And at this point, you can kind of start to imply the shape of a few leaves. That way there, it'll add just a little bit of realism. If you kind of see like that point there, maybe one here. Kind of give them some definition in between them. Again, with a tree this far away, you don't need to see every single leaf. And then the ones towards the top can be a little brighter. A little bit in here where I drew in that extra one. And then some, you can have little points underneath of shadow come down, like me, little one there, because you know that there's some leaves behind there that aren't getting as much sun. Some little highlights here. And come back through with this color. And at this point, I'm not really going to necessarily blend any out. I'm just going to keep layering. And let the pencil do some blending. Because I kind of like the rough look. But I am going to come back through, bump up those shadows just a little bit more. So it's just a refining at this point. This is when you come in and you do those details. You darken those darks. If you have to, you can come through with your mono eraser, an electric eraser, or even a craft knife and scrape out some of the details in the leaves to make them lighter again, which I may do in a minute. I want to get that in here. They tend to be a little darker as they are at the base of the tree, and you can kind of spiral out with these branches. Kind of picture them going up to the sky. So I think I actually am going to come through and just do a little bit of OMS in the lighter areas. Kind of going back on what I said before. But this is just going to kind of help saturate these. I'm just doing little dabbing effects though, so I don't lose that detail. Normally all this pencil mark wouldn't be there, because this would be surrounded by a background and you wouldn't necessarily see those pencil marks. So that's something to note as well. I should have erased that a little bit better, but okay. So I did that a little bit. And I just wanted to show you another trick that you can do to lighten things up using magic tape, which I go back and forth on this. I don't use it a whole lot on my own work anymore. It works great, but it's not necessarily archival, as I mentioned, to have it on your work for long periods of time. But this will help lighten things if you just take a piece of magic tape, Scotch magic tape, and go through. I would prefer to use it to do it with artist tape. It's just harder to see because you can't see through artist tape, but artist tape would be more archival and it would still lift things. This stuff isn't necessarily made to be on artwork, and we don't know how much of the adhesive stays on there. So we want to make sure that we're not putting anything on our finished artwork that we plan to sell that could potentially cause archival issues. But that is a trick you can use. I would recommend artist tape. You just kind of have to work around it a little bit more. And then I'm going to come through a little bit with my Tombow mono eraser and lighten these things up a little bit more. Here's a branch here that you'll want to do this once your OMS is completely dry. I'm just kind of a little bit rushed for time here, so I wanted this branch to stand out a little bit more. And then I'm going to come back through again with my darker colors. This time I'm actually going to use a little bit of black. I'm going to use very light pressure in some areas so I can just kind of glaze the black over some of these shadow areas so that the color still shows through, as I showed you before. But then it will get a little bit darker in the darker areas. And then I'm going to kind of pick out these little leaves in some areas just to kind of create a little bit more dimension within those light areas. But not too much because I don't want it to get too dark. I'll come through with another color in a minute to work on that. So as you can see, there's a lot of going back and forth. There's a lot of light layers. You darken as you gradually go. And if you need to lighten things up, there are multiple ways to do that. Another way would be to take a lighter colored pencil in the same color. I wouldn't use white necessarily, but kind of come through and dig in there and pick out some of these lighter spots and burnish them up a little bit. But that's the basics of it. And I'm kind of running out of time now, so I don't think I'll do a pine tree, not a full pine tree. Kind of come through because I did use black there, so I'm coming over with green and going over those black areas because I didn't want it to be pure black. So I do use black in my artwork, but never just by itself. Kind of give some life. So here's our little young, you can put some little branches in here kind of sticking out too. Define some of these edges a little bit, kind of give it a little bit more realism. This is where you can, as I mentioned before, kind of pick out just 1 or 2 leaves to highlight and get those angles on. So there's a lot of repetition. I just go through and keep looking at that tree out there, and of course doing it live and, you know, like doing it from life, I should say, you kind of have to work quick, which isn't necessarily easy in colored pencil because the light is shifting all the time. So even since I just started this a little less than a half hour ago, and then just to create some impressions that there's multiple leaves in there, I'm coming through and just putting in these little lines and shapes. Little triangle here, little check mark there with a darker color. This one is, I think this is chocolate, so this is actually brown, but as you can see, it doesn't hurt it any. And actually, since this is a young tree, there's some kind of redder areas in it. So I'm just going to come through and glaze a little bit of this orangey color in some of the areas because these are young leaves, and young maple leaves actually have a little bit of red in them. And this will kind of bring some of these branches forward as well. And I'm just scribbling. I'm not, you know, nothing perfect about it. Use a little bit more of a shadow over here. As you can tell at this point, I'm not even paying close attention to my colors. I just want that value in there. And there are browns that can be seen in between leaves, so it doesn't hurt to have browns in there. Okay, so that is the basics of it. And that's the basics of drawing a young little sapling or maple tree. Get a little triangle in there. And as you can see, I'm very... I could pick at this for hours and keep working on this for hours. But this is just a quick demonstration. And these techniques can be used in many different kinds of trees. The basics are, look for your negative shapes in the shadow areas. I place my shadows first. I mean, even if you want to do your light color first and then come in and do your shadows, I place the shapes of the shadows first. That's the main thing I'm looking for. These shapes in between. It's negative painting, negative drawing. And then I'm coming in and doing the detail on those branches. So you want to look for these clumps. Remember that branches go up and towards the sky and curve. And you have some on the front, some on the back, and not just on the sides like I mentioned before. So that's the basics of it. And it's going to be the same with a pine tree. It's going to be the same with basically any type of foliage, bushes. If I were to do a lilac bush, it'd be very similar, except it'd be shorter. Most plants are going to be reaching up towards the sky that way and are going to be very similar. Every type of tree, of course, is a little bit different and has some different characteristics. So obviously, like pine trees aren't going to necessarily have the same shaped clumps. They're going to have like little pokey things that come up like this. You know, because if you think of pine trees, they have pine needles. And, you know, a branch will come up and have multiple pine needles that come off it. So the clumps might be shaped differently, but you're still looking for the shapes of the clumps. And if you want, I can do a video later on where I talk more specifically about pine trees. If that's something that you're interested in, feel free to comment below, because we are kind of running out of time. This is going to be a very long video as it is. So yes, as I said, just look for those clumps. Look for those shadows. Shadows are not just black. You know, just look for the subtleties within the light. Look for your values and abstract shapes. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Observe your tree. I look at trees everywhere I go. When I'm riding in the car, I'm always looking at trees. If it's something that you're interested in drawing, you need to be looking at it a lot. So you look at trees everywhere you go. Observe how different kinds of trees, how their shapes are, the shapes of their trunk, the texture of their bark, you know, just all these different things, the shapes of the leaves and the clumps of the leaves. More often than not, you are going, if you're drawing a far away tree, you're just going to see the clumps, but if you're drawing like a close-up of a bird on a branch, then you're going to want to know that the kind of anatomy of a specific leaf as well. So just really observe and look for those abstract shapes and those shadows and those highlights, and really you can come up with some fun trees. So I hope that this has been helpful to you. I know a lot of you have asked, and thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to see more demonstrations like this, please comment below. Like I said, I could do a pine tree if you'd like, or if there's some other type of plant or other nature thing that you're interested in me doing a broken down kind of demo like this, a real-time demo, please just let me know in the comments below. All right, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye. Here's this week's painting of the week. For more information on how you can purchase this little colored pencil piece, please check out the link in the description below. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you like what you see, please hit subscribe. Also, if you're interested in seeing more of my artwork, I'm on social media, so check out the links in the description below.